A 20-year high in migrant detentions at the southern border. Homeland Security head saying the U.S. has encountered an unprecedented number of migrants illegally crossing the border. More cities in Afghanistan falling to the Taliban. 3,000 American troops are being sent to secure the U.S. embassy. And the UN says more than 18 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance there as the conflict escalates. And what's in a $3.5 trillion budget blueprint? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer publicly released the full text of Senator Bernie Sanders' proposal. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Let's kick off with the southern border. Border Patrol seeing the highest levels of migrant detainment in 2 decades. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said Thursday the U.S. has encountered an unprecedented number of migrants illegally crossing the border. In July, Customs and Border Protection took more than 212,000 people into custody. That was an increase from June and the highest monthly number of migrants detained at the U.S.-Mexico border in 2 decades. The spike from June to July was also notable because arrests usually drop during the hottest summer weeks. Of those individuals arrested in July, more than 95,000 were expelled. 27% had previously tried to cross the border. Customs and Border Protection also arrested more than 18,000 unaccompanied children in July. Now, speaking of borders, let's turn to Afghanistan. 4 more cities have fallen to Taliban fighters. That's including the second biggest city, Kandahar. Kandahar is a traditional stronghold for the militant group and a key economic hub. A spokesman for the Taliban said on Friday they had captured 3 other cities, including the capital of Helmand province. They now control most of northern Afghanistan and about a third of the country's regional capitals. Afghan national forces appear to either surrender or flee. 13 provincial capitals are now under Taliban rule, with a similar fate possibly just weeks away for the national capital, Kabul. In response to the Taliban's swift advances, the Pentagon announced it was sending 3,000 extra troops in to help evacuate U.S. embassy staff. This comes just weeks before U.S. troops scheduled to complete their withdrawal from the country.
This is a prudent step, a prudent reduction.
As the U.S. works to remove embassy personnel from Afghanistan.
This is not abandonment. What this is a reduction in the size of our civilian footprint.
And warns all American civilians to leave the country immediately amid the deteriorating security situation. The Taliban's rapid offensive raising fears of a complete takeover. With just weeks to go before the planned U.S. troop drawdown, the White House is sticking to its promise to end America's longest war.
Our larger point here is ultimately the Afghan National Security Defense Forces have the equipment, numbers, and training to fight back.
But the Pentagon is not ready to rule anything out.
I am not going to speak about planning contingencies or potential outcomes. And the other thing I'd say is that no potential outcome has to be inevitable.
In recent remarks, President Biden said Americans have lost thousands of personnel in Afghanistan, and the Afghans need to fight for themselves and for their nation. And it's not just America. Britain is also deploying troops to help bring its nationals home, as the UK Defense Minister warns the country is spiraling towards a failed state that could become a breeding ground for al-Qaeda. The speed of the offensive has sparked recriminations among many Afghans over President Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from the conflict. Biden said this week that he did not regret his decision, noting Washington has spent more than $1 trillion and lost thousands of troops. A U.S. intelligence assessment this week said the Taliban could isolate Kabul within 30 days and take it over in 90. The United Nations has warned that if their offensive does reach the capital, it would have a catastrophic impact on civilians. And as for the people in Afghanistan, the UN says more than 18 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance there as the conflict escalates. And now let's travel back to America and turn to the massive budget proposal. Senate Democrats passed a $3.5 trillion budget resolution earlier this week. The proposal now waits for the House to vote on once they return from recess. But in the meantime, what are those funds for? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer publicly released the full text of Senator Bernie Sanders' $3.5 trillion budget proposal. It seeks to enact Biden's Build Back Better plan and seeks to meet Biden's climate change goals of 80% clean electricity and 50% economy-wide carbon emissions reduction by 2030. It would bar new taxes on families making less than $400,000 per year and on small businesses and family farms. According to estimates in the bill, the deficit would increase from $1.3 billion in 2022 up to $1.8 trillion in 2031. Because of this deficit, the national debt would be $45 trillion by 2031. The resolution is sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders, who said on the Senate floor this would be the most consequential and comprehensive piece of legislation for working people that the Senate has addressed since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, let's take a look at the resolution, going from what Senate Democrats say are the most costly to the less costly. $726 billion is slated to go towards education, funding universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, tuition-free community college, and childcare for working families. Funds will also go towards investments in historically black colleges. Next up is housing. $332 billion goes towards government subsidies for low-income and affordable housing. Sanders noted the high number of homeless people in the country. Speaking of housing, there are also funds to move the U.S. away from fossil fuels. $198 billion goes to the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and an additional $67 billion directed towards the Environment and Public Works Committee. That's to weatherize and electrify homes. Funds will also go towards producing domestic clean energy for the car industry. And the droughts in the West Coast haven't gone unnoticed. $135 billion goes to the Agriculture Committee to use towards agriculture conservation, drought, and forestry programs. That's to help reduce carbon emissions and prevent wildfires. $107 billion goes to the Judiciary Committee to give citizenship to illegal immigrants. Sanders began his speech by unveiling the budget by saying that the time is long overdue for comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship for millions of undocumented workers and families in this country. And with those funds, Democrats are doubling down on their word. The tech sector also gets some funds. $83 billion goes to the House Committee on Commerce, Science, and Technology to fund more research, manufacturing, and economic development to create coastal resiliency and healthy oceans. $67 billion goes to fund low-income solar and other climate-friendly technologies. $37 billion for the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs to electrify the federal vehicle fleet, such as the Postal Service. $25 billion for the Small Business Committee to give small business access to credit, investment, and markets. And $20.5 billion goes to the Indian Affairs Committee to fund native health, language, housing, and energy programs. $18 billion goes to the Veterans Affairs Committee to upgrade their facilities, and at least $1 billion to the Finance Committee for such things as paid family and medical leave, Medicare, child tax credit, and long-term care for seniors. And before we end, let's hop on over to the entertainment world. Pop star Britney Spears' father has agreed to step down as conservator of her $60 million estate, and what the pop star's lawyer called a major victory on Thursday. That's after months of public pressure from Britney Spears supporters. The move comes days after a judge denied a petition filed by Britney's attorney to move a September 29th hearing about the case up to August 23rd. That's in an effort to remove her father as conservator as soon as possible. A legal response issued by Jamie Spears' attorneys Thursday said there are no grounds for suspending or removing him, and it is, quote, highly debatable whether a change in conservator at this time would be in Britney's best interests. Nor would a public battle with his daughter over his continuing service as her conservator be in her best interests. The singer's attorneys called it vindication for Britney and said they will continue their investigation into the father's conduct. Spears' father has controlled much of his daughter's affairs for over a decade, since she suffered a public mental health breakdown in 2008. During a July hearing, Britney Spears said she wanted to press charges against her father for, quote, conservatorship abuse, and called a 13-year arrangement cruelty. Jamie Spears defended his actions as conservator in his response Thursday and called for an orderly transition to a new conservator following resolution of some outstanding matters in the case. Britney has not performed since 2018 and has said she will not return to the stage while her father retains control over her career. The nature of the singer's mental health issues have never been publicly revealed. But what do you think? Let me know below. And before you go, we have an announcement. There will not be Deep Dive next week as I'll be off. For those wondering about China in Focus, my colleague Evelyn Lee will be standing in for me there. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and have a wonderful weekend.